In Manim, we can change practically almost all the predefined configurations. There are 3 ways we can do this. 1. Using configuration files. 2. Using Manim CLI, that is, the command line. And 3. Using the config dictionary. In this video, we will learn how to use the first method. The first thing we are going to do is see all the settings that Manim has by default. For this, go to your terminal with your virtual environment activated and execute the following command. You can see, there are many values already predefined by default. If we want to change them, we can create a configuration file. This file can be called in any way, and must have the extension CFG. Once the file is created, the first thing to indicate is the type of property that we are going to configure. There are 5 types: CLI, custom folders, logger, fmpeg, and Jupyter. In this basic course, we are only going to modify the CLI and custom folders. To indicate the type of property, we write it in brackets. Now we can write the property that we want to change. A disadvantage of using CFG files is that they do not work for all options, even when you specify them in the files, so we will only be able to modify a few. Still, there are cool things we can do with these files. We can define the background color and the preview to be as always enabled, without needing to use the P flag. Be careful with the colors, as you do not get the same color palette for Manim, they can be set at hexadecimal format. Once the changes are saved, we can use this file with the C flag. We can have as many configuration files as you want. We can define the background color and the preview to be as always enabled, without needing to use the P flag. However, there is a special case. If your config file is called Manim, then you don't have to use the C flag, as Manim will recognize it and use it automatically. An easier way to generate your configuration file is by using this command. Be careful, this command will overwrite the Manim CFG file if you already have it created. When you run it, it will open your text editor by default. You can close it if you want. The Manim CFG file has already been created. As I mentioned before, not all of these options work correctly, so let's explain the ones that do work and are the most useful. We divide the CLI properties into 3: debugging, caching, and folders. We will start with the debug properties. As we saw, preview is equivalent to using the default P flag. Verbosity is the number of messages that the terminal gives you when rendering the video. If you want Manim to tell you all the information, then use debug. If you want to only indicate errors, then use warning. I don't recommend using the other 2. In the case of progress bar, the display option shows the bar temporarily until it is completed. If you use leave, then it won't be removed. This is useful when you're tracking bugs. I don't recommend using it by default. I recommend that you create a configuration file specialized in debugging, where you can configure verbosity as debug and progress bar as leave. In the How Manim Works video, we learned that Manim generates the videos using FFmpeg, which is true, but also, when Manim is rendering your animations, Manim separates each animation and pause into a video, and in the end puts all of those together to export the final video. You can find those mini videos in the Partial Movie Files folder. You may notice that these videos have a special code, which is called hash. This is a special number that helps Manim identify each part of the video. This hash also works to avoid rendering parts of the video that do not undergo changes. That is, if Manim detects that your animation has not undergone changes in certain parts of your scene, then Manim is not going to render it again, but rather that he is going to use the video that he has previously rendered to concatenate it with the other parts. However, these hashes tend to fail when we add audio to it or when we use relatively complex updaters, so it is sometimes necessary to disable it. For this, we can use the Disable Caching flag. Still, if your animation is simple and you don't import audio, then you can leave hashing on. By default, Manim saves 100 files that can be reused in case Manim does not detect changes in your code. You can leave as many as you want. Finally, we have the folders. As you may have noticed from the beginning of the course, the structure of the folders is as follows, as indicated in the configuration file, but you can change it to your liking. For now, we will ignore the directory log and section directories. We will study them later. The assets directory, that is, SVG, images and sounds, is configured in assets dir. We will return to this in Chapter 6. The text and text directories are folders for temporary files. We will return to this in Chapter 8. The module name is the name of the script, that is, the Python file. Personally, I like the following setup. Note that if the folder we indicate does not exist, Manim creates it for us. This is the configuration that I use in my personal projects, but you can define the one you like. To finish, we have the properties of custom folders. The custom folders are an alternative option to the folders defined in CLI. I recommend that you change the name to Media dir. I usually call it Custom Exports. This folder structure is only activated if in the terminal we use the Custom Folders flag. If we use this flag, then the CLI folder structure will be ignored and the custom folders will be used. This option is particularly useful when we are doing tests and we do not want to delete the files that are in the CLI structure. You can think of custom folders as an alternate space for testing without affecting the content of the other folders, so they are totally independent. Pro tip: when you do a large project, it can be comfortable to have it isolated from others. What we can do is create a project folder. This project can have your assets and your own configuration files isolated. Personally, I like having 4 configuration files. The file that Manim will use by default, one for debugging, another for testing, and another for exporting the finished video. The only thing I recommend is that you have a clear organization so that you do not get confused and that hinders your work. I recommend that you have a folder in your work environment where you have them all. Jupyter case. In the case of Jupyter, it will load the Manim CFG file once you import the library. You can also indicate the configuration file using the magic commands. If you modify the Manim CFG file after Jupyter is loaded, then you will have to restart the kernel for the modifications to take effect. In the next video, we will delve into the CLI of Manim,